Snow had been falling across the high plains since before dawn, soft at first, then heavier as the morning aged. By midday, it lay nearly a foot deep around the Hawthorne Ranch, smoothing the broken fence lines and half-buried wagon tracks until the whole place looked like someone had thrown a white sheet over a life too tired to move. Ellen Hawthorne stood on her porch with her collar turned up against the wind, watching the slow drift settle on the barn roof. She'd lived her entire life on this land, but winter had a way of making even the familiar feel foreign, like the world was reminding her she didn't know everything she thought she did. It was 3 days before Christmas, though nothing in the air felt celebratory. There were no lanterns hung along the porch rail, no pine wreath on the door the way her father used to insist. Sam Hawthorne had liked a good Christmas, liked the smell of cinnamon and pine, liked the way the ranch hands dropped their work early and gathered near the stove. Ellen wondered what he would think now, if he could see how quiet the place had become since he passed. She suspected he would frown, then shrug, then tell her to quit fussing and get on with it. He'd been gone a year and some, but his voice still lived in the walls. Ellen pulled her gloves tighter and stepped off the porch. She had a supply list in her pocket and a half-day's worth of chores waiting behind her, but the feed store closed early before holidays, and she needed grain for the cattle before the next storm pinned her in. The ranch wasn't as big as it once was. She'd been forced to sell off some stock after her father died, but it still demanded more hands than she had. A smarter woman might have sold the whole spread and moved into town like folks suggested. But she wasn't built for that kind of quitting. Not yet, anyway. Her boots crunched through the snow as she crossed to the barn and hitched up her team. The horses tossed their heads, breath clouding in the frigid air. They were good animals, steady, sure-footed, patient with her the way most men weren't. Ellen climbed into the wagon, clicked her tongue, and set off down the north trail toward town. The ski had that look of held breath, flat, metallic, waiting. She drove with her shoulders tight and her hat pulled low, fighting the wind that came sweeping down the ridge like it was late for something. As she traveled, her thoughts drifted to the same place they always did when the world turned quiet. Those men who had come courting after her father died. They'd brought flowers, kind words, and smiles too quick to trust. But beneath all that politeness, she'd seen the same calculation in their eyes. How many acres, how much water rights, how much stock. None of them had ever asked what she wanted. She shook the thought away as she reached the feed store, loaded the sacks of grain, traded a curt greeting with the clerk who asked too many questions, and headed back toward home. By then the light was thinning. Dusk came early in December, and the trail from town wound through a patch of pines that swallowed daylight whole. Ellen urged the horses faster, wanting to beat the full dark. She never saw the tree across the road until it loomed up out of the shadows, an old ponderosa laid clean across the trail, as if dropped there by a giant's careless hand. The horses balked, snorting clouds of steam. Ellen muttered under her breath and climbed down, stepping into snow that reached nearly to her shins. "Damn wind," she murmured, brushing snow from her coat sleeve. The tree was too heavy to move alone. She'd need a saw or at least a rope and leverage. She crouched to assess how bad it was. That was when she heard a soft shift of snow behind her, the quiet kind that belonged to someone who knew how to move in silence. She stood so fast her knees cracked. A man shaped himself out of the dusk. He stood a few yards away, lithe and lean, wrapped in a dark winter coat trimmed with worn fur. His hair, black as coal dust, was tied at the nape of his neck, a few strands loose across his cheek. Even in the low light, she could see his features strong, carved by wind and sun, the unmistakable bearing of an Apache man. His eyes held no fear, only a wary steadiness that pinned her in place. Ellen took one small step back. "You need something?" she asked. keeping her voice firm though her pulse rattled against her ribs. He didn't answer. Not at first. Then he lifted a hand, not threatening, but deliberate, signaling her to stay still. The horses stamped nervously. Ellen's breath frosted between them. Before she had time to react, the man closed the distance with the quiet precision of someone used to hunting or tracking. A cloth came over her mouth, clean, but smelling faintly of juniper and smoke. She tried to shove him away, but he caught her wrists with surprising gentleness, as if he didn't want to hurt her. Her last clear thought before the world tilted was that his eyes, dark as river stone, held something more complicated than malice. Then the snow blurred. The pines folded in on themselves, and she felt the cold ground rise up to meet her. Christmas was 3 days away. And Ellen Hawthorne, who expected nothing from the season, had no idea her world had just begun to change. Ellen woke with the taste of cold iron in her mouth, and a ringing in her ears that made the world wobble like a wagon wheel on uneven ground. For a long moment, she didn't know where she was. Her cheek pressed against old wood, splintered, dry, smelling faintly of mold and horses long gone. Above her, rafters leaned at tired angles, and moonlight dripped through the gaps like thin silver threads. When her eyes cleared, she pushed herself upright. Pain flared along her wrist, sharp and hot, but not enough to stop her. She took in the room slowly. A stall, old, abandoned. The boards were gray with age, dust layered thick across the beams. A rusted horseshoe hung crooked on a nail near her head. Straw littered the floor, sparse and brittle. Somewhere outside, wind howled over open ground, the sound of winter gnawing at whatever dared stand in its way. Someone had brought her here, and she knew exactly who. Her pulse thudded hard. She reached for the door of the stall, testing it with both hands. It wasn't locked, but stuck from warping and time. She shoved her shoulder against it and managed to open it just enough to slip through. "Do not run." The voice came from the shadows, calm and steady, carrying a low echo that belonged to someone used to speaking quietly and being heard anyway. Ellen spun around. The Apache man from the trail stood a few yards away, his back against a support beam, arms loosely crossed. He wasn't blocking the exit, but he didn't have to. Something in his posture, quiet, centered, unwavering, told her he could reach her before she made it 3 steps. His coat was dusted with snow. His hair had loosened, a few strands falling over his cheek. Up close, his presence filled the air like the heat from a banked fire, contained, but powerful if stirred. "Why did you bring me here?" she demanded, throat aching with cold and fear. "What do you want?" His gaze flicked to her injured wrist. "You hurt your hand." "That's not an answer." "No," he said lightly. "It is not." He moved toward her, then slow, deliberate, as if not wanting to spook her. Ellen tensed, ready to fight, but he stopped short, leaving a careful distance between them. "You are not my prisoner," he said. "Not in the way you believe." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You knocked me out and dragged me to a damn Stacy table." He inclined his head as if acknowledging a truth he didn't deny. "Because I needed your attention. And time. You would not have given me either if I asked on the road." "You could have asked," she shot back. "No," he replied softly. "You would have refused." Ellen opened her mouth to argue and found she couldn't. She would have refused. The men who'd come sniffing around her land had made her wary of any stranger, let alone an Apache man appearing out of a winter storm. He stepped aside, giving her a clear view of the only exit, an old barn door hanging loosely from its hinges. A lantern burned there, throwing a warm circle of light that barely pushed back the dark. She could run. There was nothing physically stopping her, except he didn't look like a man who'd chase her with malice. "Who are you?" she asked finally. "Ali," he answered, "son of Taza, grandson of Clanith." The names meant nothing to her, but the way he said them, like a lineage carved into the stone of his bones, made her straighten. "And what do you want with me?" she pressed. His jaw flexed once, a shadow of conflict crossing his features. "Your father." The words hit her like a slap. "My father is dead." "Yes," Ali said, "and he died owing something that cannot stay buried." Her heart stumbled. Owing what? Ali reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, stained, torn along the edges. He offered it to her with both hands, a gesture both cautious and ceremonial. Ellen hesitated before taking it. The paper unfolded with a soft crackle, revealing a hand-drawn map, her borderland, the western ridge, the old Ponderosa Grove, and beyond that, the steep ravine her father had forbidden her to ride through. A large X marked a section past the ridge. Her voice thinned. "This is Hawthorne land." "It was not always," Ali said. "That mark is where our dead rest, a place my people have tended for generations." Ellen looked at him sharply. "My father would never—" "He cut a fence," Ali interrupted quietly, "then built another farther west. Your father was many things, some good, some less good. He made a bargain with white officials, and in that bargain, he took what was not his." Ellen's mouth went dry. The snow outside groaned against the beams. "Why bring me here?" she whispered. "Why not tell the sheriff? A land dispute isn't something you fix with a kidnapping." Ali's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something heavier. Wounded pride, old grief. "You think the sheriff listens to my kind?" he asked softly. "You think your town would hear the truth from Apache lips? They would call me a liar, a thief, a savage. They would burn this map and bury the rest." He met her eyes fully for the first time, and the raw honesty there startled her. "I brought you because you are Hawthorne's blood, because only you can open what he closed." Silence stretched between them, thick as the winter air. Then the wind above them roared a sudden, violent blast, and the old barn shuddered. Snow dumped from the rafters, scattering over the floor like handfuls of salt. Ali's head lifted sharply. "A blizzard is coming," he said. "A hard one." He moved to the corner where a stack of firewood was kept dry under a tarp. He fed the potbelly stove, coaxing orange flame to life. "You may leave," he told her quietly. "But if you do, the storm will take you. Stay until morning, and I will let you go. I give you my word." Ellen stared at him, at the flames flickering across his face, at the map that trembled slightly in her hands. She didn't trust him, but she saw truth in him, and something else, something she couldn't yet name. Outside, the wind rose like a living thing. Inside, Ellen felt the first shift of a story she had never meant to enter. The blizzard arrived not with a roar, but with a quiet that felt wrong, an eerie stillness that seeped through every crack of the abandoned barn. Snow pressed against the walls like a patient animal waiting to get in. Ellen pulled her coat tighter as she watched flakes swirl past the gaps in the boards, white and frantic in the lantern's faint glow. Ali crouched near the stove, feeding it at another split log. Firelight flickered across his face, warm against the cold lines of a life lived outdoors. He didn't look at Ellen when he spoke. "You should sit closer to the heat," he said. "I'm fine," she answered automatically, though her fingers were stiff as old iron nails. He didn't argue, just placed a second blanket on the floor in her direction. Not too close, not too far. A small gesture, and somehow that made it harder to dismiss. Ellen lowered herself onto the blanket with a weary exhale. Her wrist throbbed in a dull, angry pulse. She tried not to let him see her grimace, but he noticed anyway. Ali stood, stepped toward her, then paused as if asking permission without words. "Let me see," he said quietly. She hesitated, pride rising like a shield. Showing weakness was something she had trained herself not to do. Not in front of ranch hands, not in front of suitors, not in front of anyone who might wish it against her. But the barn groaned under the weight of wind, and her wrist burned like fire, and she was tired of pretending strength. She held out her arm. Ali knelt beside her. His hands were calloused, steady, surprisingly gentle as he examined the swelling. He loosened the bandana he wore around his neck and tore it into strips, binding her wrist with practiced care. "You've done this before," she murmured. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Many winters injure those who live close to the mountains." She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Thank you." He nodded once, then moved back to the stove. The silence settled again, thick, heavy, but not quite hostile. For a long while neither spoke. Wind howled across the plains, rattling the barn doors, and the fire crackled in sharp little pops. Ellen studied Ali in the shifting light. He sat with his back straight, as if the earth itself had carved that posture into him. Strength without arrogance. Stillness without indifference. She'd grown up around men who filled rooms with their voice, who boasted and bragged, who believed loudness was proof of worth. Ali was none of those things, and somehow that unsettled her more. Finally she said, "You still haven't told me why you needed me. Why the map matters now." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, stripped of defenses. "Because the place my people buried their dead is being washed away." Ellen blinked. Washed away. When the railroad changed its route last spring, the blasting shook the ridge. Rocks shifted. Earth opened. Coyotes dug where they never dared before. The resting places exposed to storms, to animals, to strangers. His jaw tightened. "Our dead have no peace." A quiet ache settled in Ellen's chest. Grief was something she understood too well. "And my father had something to do with that?" she asked. "He moved the boundary line," Ali said. "Not far, 40, maybe 50 yards. But enough to claim the ridge as Hawthorne land. Enough to make white officials ignore our objections." He looked at her, steady. He may have believed he was securing his ranch, but he took more than land. Ellen lowered her gaze. Her father had been a complicated man, practical, proud, wary of strangers. He'd done what he believed necessary to protect the ranch, but she'd seen his harshness too. The way he dismissed anyone who challenged him. The way he insisted the world belonged to those strong enough to hold it. Was this one more thing he'd kept from her? "I didn't know," she whispered. "I believe you," Ali said simply. It startled her. "Why?" He shrugged slightly, though the gesture held weight. "You do not speak like someone who hides truth, and your eyes do not lie." Ellen felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she turned away, toward the fire. Compliments, honest ones, not the polished flattery of courting men, felt like cold water against her skin. The wind screamed suddenly, making the boards shudder. A drift of snow burst through a crack, scattering across the floor. Ali Rosen pressed his shoulder to the wall, reinforcing a loose beam until the gust passed. "You shouldn't be in this storm," Ellen said without thinking. "You could freeze out there." He glanced back at her, amusement touching the corner of his mouth. "I am not the one who nearly walked into it wounded." She huffed a breath that might have been a laugh, small but real. He returned to the fire, sat across from her, and for the first time since they met, the space between them felt less like a battlefield. Still, something lingered unsaid. "You didn't answer the real question," Ellen said softly. "Why me? Why bring me instead of taking the map to the sheriff?" Ali's gaze shifted into something deeper, something bruised but unbroken. "Because I needed you to listen," he said. "Not your law, not your sheriff. You." Her breath caught. "Why would I matter to you?" His eyes held hers, unflinching. Because you carry your father's land on your shoulders. Because you walk like someone used to being alone. Because strength speaks in you, but so does hurt. And people who know hurt often hear truth better than those who do not. Ellen's chest tightened, fragile and full all at once. No one had ever seen her like that. No one had ever dared say it aloud. Outside, the storm built into a living thing, slamming against the barn, demanding entry. But inside, the air warmed, not just from the stove, but from something quieter, more dangerous. A shift. A beginning. Ollie turned the map so the firelight touched its edges. When the storm passes, he said, I will show you the ridge. I ask only that you see it with your own eyes. Ellen nodded slowly. I will. Their gazes held steady, searching, uncertain. And as the blizzard raged outside, Ellen Hawthorne realized she was no longer afraid of the man who had brought her here. She was afraid of what it meant that she wasn't. The storm broke just after sunrise. Not softly, not all at once, but with the slow exhaustion of a beast that had spent the night roaring and finally ran out of breath. The wind quieted to a whisper. Snow settled like a heavy quilt across the plains, unbroken and blinding in the early light. The abandoned barn still held its chill, but inside, the fire had burned low to embers, and Ellen felt the lingering heat on her cheeks as she stirred awake. Ali was already standing near the door, studying the sky as though it were a map of intentions. Frost clung to his coat and hair. He looked carved from the cold itself, yet there was a softness to the way he breathed, the way he turned slightly when he sensed her waking. You should eat, he said, nodding toward a strip of dried venison he'd set beside her. It will be a long walk. Walk? Ellen rose slowly, stretching stiff muscles. The wagon. Buried. And the horses found their way home or froze trying. His voice held neither apology nor cruelty. Only truth. She swallowed her worry. The ranch had lost too much already. Losing horses would carve another hole in her chest. But there was no time to grieve over what she couldn't change. Ali tied his bedroll and slung it across his shoulder. I will take you back. The words struck her more sharply than she expected. In the dim hours between waking and sleeping, she had grown used to his presence, the way he moved through the shadows without fear, the way the storm couldn't bend him. She didn't want to admit she'd felt safer with him near. But going back meant facing a town that barely tolerated her independence, let alone an Apache man at her side. Still, she nodded. All right. They stepped into the snow. It reached nearly to Ellen's knees, each step slow and sinking. Ali broke the path ahead, parting the drifts with powerful strides. Ellen followed close, her breath turning to frost around her scarf. The world was quiet, a silence so complete it hummed in her ears. After nearly an hour, the familiar outline of her ranch house came into view, its roof heavy with snow, chimney cold, windows dark. A strange ache took root in her. She'd always thought of the ranch as a fortress, a place that kept her safe from disappointment. Now, for the first time, she wondered if it had kept her imprisoned as well. Smoke drifted from the east ridge, and voices carried faintly across the still air. Ellen stiffened. Someone's here. Ali had seen it too. He slowed, positioning himself half a step behind her, a protective instinct. Moments later, 3 riders emerged from behind the barn, rifles visible against their saddles. Sheriff Wallace led them, his thick coat dusted white, his eyes narrowed and puffy from lack of sleep. Ellen? He called, relief and suspicion tangling in his voice. Thank the Lord you're alive. She barely had time to prepare herself before his gaze slapped to Ali. The warmth left his expression instantly. You, the sheriff growled. Put your hands up, slowly. Ali did not move. His breath misted in the air. He looked like a man who had stood in front of rifles before and learned how not to fear them. Ellen stepped forward. Sheriff, stop. He musties. Ma'am, Wallace interrupted harshly. You've been missing for a full day. Folks saw Apache tracks near where your wagon overturned. We know what happened. No, Ellen said firmly. You don't. Wallace swung off his horse and approached her. Did he touch you, hurt you, threaten you? You can tell me. He saved my life. The words burst from her with more fire than she intended. The deputies froze. Wallace blinked. Ellen pushed on, voice steady but trembling at the edges from anger rather than fear. The storm nearly killed me. I'd have died out there if he hadn't taken me somewhere safe. He kept me warm, patched my wrist, and waited out the blizzard with me. Wallace's jaw worked, chewing on disbelief. You expect me to believe an Apache man wandered out of the mountains to play nursemaid? Ali's face barely changed, but Ellen felt the insult like a slap on his behalf. He didn't wander, she said sharply. He came to speak to me about my father. And yes, he brought me there against my will, but only because he knew I wouldn't listen any other way. The deputies exchanged glance. Wallace exhaled sharply. So you admit he kidnapped you? Ellen swallowed. She'd known that word was coming, but she forced herself to meet the sheriff's gaze. I admit he made a mistake, but he also saved my life. And I will not let you arrest him for keeping me alive. Wallace's face reddened. Ellen Hawthorne, don't you understand the danger? The danger, she said quietly, is assuming every Apache man is a criminal. The sheriff froze at her tone. Ali watched her calm, unreadable, but something in his stance softened. Silence stretched. The wind moved softly through the trees. Finally, Wallace said, if he stays, the town will push for his arrest. There'll be trouble. Ellen straightened her shoulders. Then let them push. If they want a fight, they can have it with me. Wallace stared at her a long while, seeing the hawthorn fire rise in her eyes. At last he spat into the snow. Fine, but if anything happens, I'll hold you responsible. That's fair, she replied. He mounted his horse and signaled his men. They turned back toward town, muttering under their breath. When they disappeared into the distance, the world went quiet again. Ellen turned to Ali. I'm sorry, she said. They shouldn't have talked to you like that. He regarded her with a softness so unexpected it made her chest tighten. I have been called worse. What matters is that you spoke truth. She swallowed hard. The cold bit at her cheeks, but warmth bloomed somewhere deeper. You saved my life, she whispered. Let me return the favor. Ali looked at her home, then at the path ahead, then back at her, as though weighing a choice he hadn't expected to have. Very well, he said. I will stay. For now. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding slipped from her lips. Together, they crossed the final stretch toward the house, two figures stepping into the uncertain light of a winter morning, their shadows falling long and side by side across the snow. The snow had settled deeper by afternoon, turning the yard into rolling mounds of white, broken only by the dark tips of fence posts and the remains of Ellen's wagon, peeking through like the ribs of some fallen creature. The air smelled of pine and smoke, the first living smell since the storm, and Ellen breathed it in with something that felt dangerously close to relief. She hadn't felt relief in a long time, not since before her father died, not since the ranch grew too quiet. Now Ali walked behind her, the crunch of his boots a steady rhythm that matched her steps. He carried himself with the ease of someone who did not need noise to announce his presence. She could feel him there without looking, like the sure weight of a blanket over cold shoulders. Inside the house, the warmth hit them like a sigh. Ellen knelt by the stove, coaxing the embers to life. She didn't realize how stiff her hands were until she fumbled with the matches. Here, Ali murmured. He struck one for her, offering the small flame cupped in his palm. Firelight danced across his skin, gilding the scar that cut along his thumb. She met his eyes briefly, long enough for something wordless to pass between them, then leaned in to guide the flame to the waiting kindling. "You know your way around a stove," she said as the fire caught. "My mother taught me," he replied. "The mountains do not keep a man warm unless he learns how." Ellen smiled despite herself. "My father taught me the same, only he used more cussing." This time Ali's expression softened, almost into a smile. He sat across from her, hands resting loosely on his knees. The fire crackled between them, casting shadows up the walls, shadows that didn't feel lonely for once. "You should rest," he said. "Your wrist is swollen." "I'll live." "Yes," he answered, "but pain slows the body. The body slowed makes weak choices." She raised a brow. "And you think you know my choices?" His gaze held hers without flinching. "I know you do not ask for help." That stilled her. Not because it wasn't true, but because he said it without judgment. Before she could respond, he stood and moved toward the mudroom. She heard him shifting tools, clearing something heavy. Moments later, he returned with an armful of firewood he must have gathered earlier. "You planning on rebuilding my ranch for me?" she asked lightly. "If that is what needs doing." Ellen blinked. He said it plain, without flourish or expectation. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. Ali set the wood by the stove. "In my people, when someone saves your life, you honor it with service." He looked at her meaningfully. "You saved mine this morning, Ellen Hawthorne." Her breath caught. She had forgotten the moment, forgotten how she stepped between him and the rifles without thinking, how anger and fear churned into something fierce and protective. "I only told the truth," she whispered. "Truth is not a small thing," he said. "Not in this land." A hush settled over them, warm and fragile. Later, when she stepped outside to check the surviving cattle, Ali followed without question. He fixed the latch on the gate before she even asked, his fingers moving with a quiet confidence that made her throat tighten in a way she couldn't name. She had grown so used to doing everything herself, to tightening every bolt, carrying every load, mending every break. Having someone beside her, not overtaking, not hovering, just working with her, felt unfamiliar. Unfamiliar and dangerously tender. As the sun dipped lower, painting the snow in a pale gold, Ali paused by the fence line. His eyes traveled toward the distant ridge, where the land rose sharp and blue-gray against the sky. "That is where I will take you tomorrow," he said. "The resting place of my ancestors lies beyond that rise." Ellen followed his gaze. She had ridden those hills her whole life, yet she'd never thought about who walked them before her family arrived. It struck her then with sudden clarity that the land had a memory longer than her father's ownership, longer even than the town's founding. "What happens if the ridge erodes further?" she asked quietly. "Our past disappears," he said. "And when a people lose their past, they become ghosts." The weight of his words pressed on her chest. She had spent months trying to keep her father's legacy alive, feeding cattle alone, patching barns at midnight, pushing away anyone who came sniffing around her land. She was afraid of losing the ranch. Yes, but deeper still, she was afraid of losing the last piece of him. They weren't so different, she realized, each of them standing guard over something loved and fragile. "Ali," she said, turning toward him. "If the map is real, if my father did move that boundary, I'll help you set it right." He looked at her for a long moment, the cold wind lifting strands of his hair. Something unspoken, something soft and solemn entered his eyes. "Thank you," he said, not as a casual courtesy, not as a debt, but as a confession. And for the first time since she'd met him, Ellen felt warmth bloom beneath her ribs, gentle but persistent, like a small fire starting deep in winter. Evening fell. They shared a simple stew at the kitchen table, elbows nearly touching, but not quite. The house didn't feel as large or empty as it had the day before. Ellen found herself watching the way Ali held his spoon, the quiet grace in every movement, the stillness that wrapped around him like a second coat. He wasn't a man who demanded space. He was a man who created it. When the fire burned low and the night deepened, Ellen rose to light the lamp. Ali stood too, gathering his coat. "I will sleep in the barn tonight," he said. "It is enough shelter." "You'll freeze out there," she protested. "I have known worse nights." She hesitated, then nodded. "At least take extra blankets." He accepted them, his fingers brushing hers. A quick, unplanned touch. It sent a small shock through her, a spark she wasn't ready for, but didn't want to forget. "Good night, Ellen Hawthorne," he said. "Good night, Ali." She watched him disappear into the dark, his silhouette cutting against the white snow. And for the first time in years, she wondered, not fearfully, but with a quiet, trembling hope, who she might become if she let someone stay long enough to know her. Dawn broke pale over the snow, the ski the color of coal tin. Ellen saddled her mare, one of the few horses left after the storm, and wrapped her scarf tight as Ali approached from the barn. Frost clung to his hair and shoulders, glittering as though winter itself had dusted him with silver. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Show me." They set off toward the ridge, hooves crunching through the brittle crust of snow. The air smelled sharp and ancient, carrying the hush of a world that had endured long before fence, laws, or men with restless eyes. Ellen followed Ali up the narrow trail, her breath puffing white, her heart heavier with each step. The ridge rose steeply, its slope carved by centuries of storms. When they reached the crest, Ali stopped and pointed beyond a stand of twisted juniper. There. Ellen looked. Below them, tucked between two broken rock shelves, lay a small clearing, half buried in snow. Stones arranged in careful circles lay scattered, some toppled, others kicking. Winter had chewed the ground raw. She could see where earth had slid away, leaving shallow hollows open to the sky. Ali's voice came low. "Our dead rested here. Fathers and mothers, warriors, children. It was a place of prayer and story." Ellen dismounted, boots sinking deep as she approached the stones. She knelt, brushing snow away from a carved spiral, worn smooth by wind. "I had no idea," she whispered. "No one ever told me this was sacred." "No one wanted you to know," Ali said. He stood beside her, hands clasped at his back. "Your father believed he needed this ridge to keep your ranch safe. He did not mean disrespect. But the land remembers even when men forget." A stillness filled the clearing, heavy and reverent. Ellen pressed her palm to the frozen earth. "I'm sorry for what he took," she said. "Sorry it hurt your people." Ali looked down at her, eyes softened by something gentler than forgiveness, understanding. Hurts heal when truth is spoken, and when someone chooses to mend what was broken. Ellen rose to her feet, snow falling from her coat. "What do you need from me? Tell me, and I'll do it." He hesitated, the cold wind tugging at his coat. "Help me return the boundary to where it was. Help me speak to the land office and claim this ridge once more. If the government will not listen to Apache words, they may listen to yours." "Yes," she said without doubt. "I'll stand with you." Those words hung between them, warm as firelight in the cold morning. But the peace shattered when hoofbeats thundered behind them. Ellen swung around, just as three riders crested the ridge, faces set hard, rifles slung across their saddles. Men from town. Men who didn't want trouble unless it served their interests. Harlan Briggs, owner of the neighboring ranch, spat into the snow. "Sheriff told us you brought an Apache here. Didn't figure you'd be stupid enough to lead him right to the ridge." Ellen stiffened. This land isn't yours, Harlan. You've no right coming up here with guns. Someone's got to protect our borders, he sneered. Heard enough stories about his kind creeping where they don't belong. Ali took a step in front of her, subtle, instinctive, protective. Ellen felt heat rise in her chest, part anger, part fear for him. He came here peacefully, she said. Put your rifles down. But Harlan wasn't listening. He pointed his gun at Ali. Step away from her, now. Ali didn't move. Ellen's pulse roared in her ears. Without hesitation, she stepped between Harlan's rifle and Ali, her boots planted firm in the snow. You fire that gun and you'll have to shoot through me. Harlan's face twisted. Girl, don't be a fool. I'm not. Her voice sharpened, strong as steel drawn from fire. I'm done letting men tell me who I should fear. Behind her, she sensed Ali still and steady, like a mountain shadow. Listen to me, all of you, Ellen continued, sweeping her gaze across the riders. My father took this land by force of signature, not right. This ridge belongs to the Apache, and I'm going to help return it. Murmurs erupted. Commotion. Anger. A few looks of ashamed understanding. Harlan lowered his rifle an inch. You're siding with him over your own kind. I'm siding with the truth, Ellen said. With decency. With what's right. A long silence held. Wind rustled the juniper branches like old hands applauding. At last Harlan exhaled. Sheriff won't like it. Town won't either. That's their choice, she answered. And this is mine. Harlan cursed under his breath, then jerked his chin to the others. They turned their horses and rode off, grumbling, but breaking no laws today. When the last hoofbeat faded, Ellen felt her knees weaken. Ali stepped closer, not touching her yet, but close enough she felt his warmth seep through the cold. You did a brave thing, he murmured. She looked up at him, breath trembling. I don't feel brave. Bravery is not a feeling, he said. It is a choosing. Her heart stuttered. And what have you chosen, Ali? He hesitated only a moment. To stay, if you will have me near. Heat blossomed through her chest, softer than sunlight, steadier than any promise she'd known. Yes, she whispered, I want you to stay. Snow drifted around them, slow, gentle flakes settling on coats and hair. A quiet Christmas snowfall, the kind that arrived like a blessing instead of a storm. Ali reached for her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. When she didn't pull away, he laced his fingers with hers, grounding her with a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Ellen, he said softly, you have given my people a future. You, she replied, gave me back a part of myself I thought was gone. They stood together on the sacred ridge, two worlds, stitched together by truth, by courage, by the fragile beginnings of something that felt dangerously close to love. And as the Christmas sun lifted over the snow, Ellen Hawthorne realized that the winter had not come to break her after all. It had come to bring her home.